Masechet Beisah, daf 25, a very interesting daf. We're going to be starting to talk about trapping animals, continuing that theme. And then the next Mishnah is going to get to the next step of actually doing shechita. When can you do shechita? And that's going to lead into some fascinating agadot, one about the very persistent nature of the Jewish people. So we'll see that soon. All right, regarding trapping in fish especially, we saw that if the fish are in a pond, and basically they're not considered trapped because you still have to go get a net, you still have to go get a trap in order to get them. So fish in a pond, you're not allowed to get them and take them on Yom Tov. However, the one thing that you're allowed to do is if you already put a net or a trap or a basket in a stream and some fish got in there from before Yom Tov, then you can take that net or that basket out on Yom Tov since they're already caught. So that case would be allowed. Right now, we're going to talk about an in-between case. They're not quite in a big pond, but they're also not caught inside a net. Rather, they're in a narrow canal, an irrigation canal. And we'll see that this will be okay. Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna Amar Rav. So Rabba, the son of Rav Huna, said the name of Rav, right? Rav is the first generation, Rav Huna is second generation. Rabba is his son, is third generation. You're going to see why these names are important. Hasocher amatamai me'arev yom tov ulmaharishkim umasa badagim mutarin. Someone who closed up a water channel, an irrigation field. They have an irrigated field, and they closed the water channel before Yom Tov. So therefore, there's no more water flowing into it, but there's already water in that channel. And then on Yom Tov, he finds some fish in there. So he knows for sure that those fish entered before Yom Tov. And that channel is, probably only a foot or two wide. And therefore, it's easy to just put your hands in and grab that fish. So that is permitted. That's considered as if it's already caught before Yom Tov. Okay, good. So we do have a way of getting fresh fish on Yom Tov. And now based on this, we learn yet another law. Amar Rav Chisda, Medivrei Rabbeinu nilmod, from the words of our teacher, meaning Rav, right? This is said in the name of Rav. This Rav Chisda is also a student. And he says, I can derive another law about animals. Chaya shekinena bepardes ena sericha zimun. Chaya, a wild animal, like a deer, that nested in an orchard. So let's say a deer nested, it means it gave birth. And now the mother is there with the child, with the foal, with the child, and the child, deer, the newborn, can't run very far. It's easy to catch. And so he says this does not require any special designation. Generally, a deer, things that are hard to catch, they're also mukseh because you're not allowed to trap them on Yom Tov. He says, but in this case, it's already in the orchard, and it's nearby, and you know that it can't go very far. So that's automatically designated that most people will have that in mind. Oh, I might want to eat that on Yom Tov. And so therefore it's permitted because it's the same thing as the fish. You see, the fish, he didn't necessarily see that there were fish that went into the channel before Yom Tov. Just usually, often they go in. And so on Yom Tov, he sees them. They're pre-designated and doesn't have to do anything special. That's the law that he learned. Now, Amar Rav Nachman, yet another student of Rav says, Nefal Chabrin Berab Rebata. He says, our colleague fell into a great controversy. Rav Chisda, by making this jump and saying that the deer is like the fish, is entered himself into a very controversial matter. And we'll see why in a second. First, we're going to see another version of these statements. A second version is not that, not Rav Chisda that said, I can derive a new thing, but rather it was Rabba bar Rav Huna himself, the one who reported the original halacha about fish in the name of Rav. He said, based on that, I can make a derivation regarding deer, that you can also take the child. Amar Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman said to him, Nafal bar chavrin berab rebata. The son of our colleague, his colleague is Rav Huna, the son is Rabba bar Rav Huna. By saying, I can learn a new law about deer, he put himself into a great controversy. Okay, so let's see what the great controversy is. about the deer. Hatam la ka'abed ma'aseh, hacha ka'abed ma'aseh. We're going to see, first of all, they are, according to reason, they're different. And also we have differing other sources about them. So in terms of reason, in one case, you actually did an act. In the case of fish, I closed the dam. And therefore, by closing the dam, that says, okay, whatever is in here already is trapped. So I'm doing something, even if my purpose is not to trap them. My purpose is that I don't need any more water here in this area. Nevertheless, I am doing something. And so there, it's easy to say that I don't need any special designation because I did something. Whereas in this case, the deer goes in on his own, on her own, into the orchard and goes and gives birth. I didn't do anything. I'm just watching it happen. And therefore, I didn't do an action. So it's harder to jump from the fish and apply that to the deer also. You could say not necessarily. Maybe the deer have to go look at it and say, oh, look, it's giving birth. I'm going to eat that deer tomorrow. You have to actually say it. So that's number one. That's why it's a controversy. And second of all, look, we have a source that goes against that derivation. Is that true that you don't have to designate it? We have an Baraita. It brings it a few cases. The first one is relevant to us, that an undomesticated animal like a deer that nests in an orchard, you have to designate it verbally. You have to say, I'm going to eat that one. So you see that you do have to, and that goes against what we said before. And also a bird, this wild bird, if you want to eat it on Yom Tov, you have to tie its wings from beforehand so that it doesn't get mixed up. These birds, like a sparrow, they grow very quickly. Within 2 to 3 weeks, they're already adult size. So it's very easy to mix up the child with the mother. And so therefore, you have to make sure that you're going to actually take the one that you designate. So you make a sign on it by tying something on its wings. Okay, so, and this was a testimony from, this is the teacher of Hillel, right, from the early generation, so it's very authoritative, Shemayin Avtalion, and therefore Tiyufta, this is a complete refutation of what either Rav Chisda or Rav Huna derived about the laws of the deer in the orchard, that it doesn't designation. According to this, it does. All right, but it's even more controversial. It's not even a total refutation, because just like we have a Braita that says it doesn't need it does need designation. Here's another one that says it doesn't. It's a long Braita. It brings lots of cases, but only one part of it is actually relevant for this discussion. Is that true that you need special designation in the case of the deer that gives birth in the orchard? V'hatanya, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Modim bet Shammai u'bet Hillel, al shehizmin betoch haken u'masal lifnei haken she'asurim. This is the case we saw before, that if you have doves inside a dovecote, and I went in there and I designate them, so I'm going to eat this one tomorrow. The next day I come and I see that it's outside on the ledge, not inside the dovecote. This is a problem, because I don't know if it came from inside the dovecote, or maybe lots of birds would fly and land on the ledge and then leave. So I don't know if it's the same ones or not. So it's not allowed. When is it prohibited? Only in the case of these doves that are in dovecotes and lofts and pitchers. We said yesterday that they would take pitchers and so that the birds can nest in them, or in a building. So those are all doves that are only semi-domesticated. So that's why you have to be stringent about them. However, domesticated birds, fully domesticated, like geese, chicken, and these Herodian doves that are fully domesticated, those I don't have to do any special designation, because they're very easy to catch, and person always has in mind that they might want to eat whatever chicken they grab, so they don't need special designation. Here's the one that's relevant for us, and a deer that nests in an orchard, that's also easy to catch, as a chicken, and therefore does not require special designation. So you see that this Baraita contradicts the one that we just saw regarding Shemaya and Avtayon. That's going to be our question. But first, a few more cases. That if you have this sparrow that grows very quickly, you have to make a tie on its wings so that you know it's not which one it is, because they look the same. It can even look like its mother. Also, birds that you tied as a sign, or maybe you shook it beforehand. Remember, Bet Shammai says you have to go in there and pick it up and shake it. Or if it's found in a cistern or a house, trench or a cave, all these things are permitted because those you specially designated, or they're in an enclosed area that's yours, and so that's permitted. Ubailanot, so in other words, if you tied it or shook it and it's in any of these places, it's permitted, except for if it's in a tree. Because if it's in a tree, even if you tied a sign on it or and you shook it, nevertheless, if you climb up a tree, then we're afraid that you're going to go pluck something. You're going to pluck some fruit from the tree. You're going to rip off some branches while you're climbing. And so therefore, climbing a tree on Yom Tov is not permitted. So make sure it's not in a tree. But if you have to climb a ladder, that's okay. And the last law about this is that if someone else tied a sign on a bird, which means he wants to eat it on Yom Tov, or he shook it, I'm not allowed to go and take it because that would be stealing. These are semi-domesticated, so they might be like out there in a common area or a field. And if I see someone else that shook it, then that means it's theirs. They actually acquire the rights to it by doing that. So if I see that, I'm not allowed to take it because that would be stealing. Okay, so that's the long braita. And now we have to answer that question. The braita we saw earlier said that the deer that gave birth in the orchard, I do have to designate if I want to eat it. And this braita says I don't have to designate it. So we want to try to reconcile them. One is talking about the child itself. That does not need designation because it can't run very far. And whereas the earlier baraita that says prohibited, that's talking about the mother, if I want to eat the mother, because the mother is, regular adult, healthy, and can run around, so that I need to designate, because otherwise most people wouldn't have in mind that they're gonna eat the deer, the mother. So now a question on that. Wait, the mother, it's not even enough to just point to it and say I'm going to eat it, because it actually needs to be captured, right? It's in an orchard, so it's somewhat enclosed, but it could still run out and still run around, and still is difficult to catch. So wouldn't be even enough if that baraita was talking about the mother. Okay, both baraitot are talking about the child. Easy to catch. We're talking about two different cases. One is that the orchard is close by, close to the city, so I can monitor it. I can go there anytime, and I can go and take it. In that case, I don't need designation, because I have in mind, I'm going to go there. I'm watching. I'm seeing what's going on. But the one that is far from the city and I'm not monitoring it, then it's less likely that I'm going to go there and eat it. And I don't know exactly what they're up to. And so therefore, in that case, that's the case of Shemai Avtayon, where it does need designation. All right. And with that, we conclude the topic of trapping animals and birds and fish on Yom Tov. And we get to the next Mishnah, which is now the next step of the process, which is shechita. Shechita, of course, is permitted. We saw before, if it's a bird, you have to make sure that you have dirt ready to cover the blood. So there's certain requirements. Here we're talking about an interesting case where I see an animal that it may die soon, right? It's in danger. And when I see that, I immediately want to go and do shechita, kosher shechita, so that the meat will be kosher. If I let it die on its own, it will be nevela. So I want to kill it. I already have a meal. I already have meat and everything, and we already ate. But I want to do shechita on Yom Tov because I don't want it to die and then all go to waste. So that's the case here. Bema mesukenet lo yishchot. So you cannot do it unless there's enough time in the day that you can eat even one kezayit that's roasted. In other words, if it's in the middle of the day, I see, oh, this animal, it doesn't look healthy, it's going to die. It's okay. You can do shechita, even though you ate already and, you don't really need it. But, the rabbis are lenient here because they don't want a person to lose this whole animal. So it's permitted. The question is, now it's a half hour before sunset and Yom Tov is about to end. Now, by the time you go and get the knife and check it and do shechita, right, and then cook the animal, this takes a long time. You got to butcher it and everything. So the minimum amount of time is how much time it will take to do shechita. Just take one olive size piece of meat, roast it quickly. How long does that take? Just a few minutes, and eat it. That's enough time. As long as you had some benefit of food from it on Yom Tov, it's permitted. But if there's not even enough time for that, then you can't do shechita just to eat it after Yom Tov. Okay, so that's the Tanakama. Rabbi Akiva is even more lenient than that. Omer afilu kezayit chai mibet tivi chata. You don't even have to wait to butcher the whole animal and cook any part of it. Even just from the neck where it's slaughtered, if you could just get one olive-sized piece of meat and enough time to eat it whole, to eat it raw, that's permitted. So that would be really just a few minutes, just a quick shechita, and then you don't even bother skinning it or butchering it or salting it, anything like that. You don't have to salt meat if you're eating it roasted or raw, because it's only the blood that comes out is out. The only problem with when you cook it and the blood that's inside comes out and goes into the pot. So therefore, the Rabbi Akiva is really very lenient in this regard. Okay, we're going to see him again. Now, next case, if you slaughter it out in the field, maybe that's where it was and it was sick and you couldn't, it was hard to bring in. So you did it out in the field. You're not allowed to carry the way you would usually carry a large animal, is you'd put it on a pole or a couple of poles, and then two people would carry each side and bring it in, because this is a way of carrying during a weekday. This doesn't look, it's not appropriate to Yom Tov to be carrying in a mass kind of way. So rather, out in the field, you should butcher it, chop it up into pieces, and then bring it in piece by piece. Even though actually in a way is harder, you have to make more trips to bring it in limb by limb, but that's more appropriate than kind of the mass production, the way it would look if you bring it in on a pole. All right, so those are the two laws of the Mishnah. We're going to analyze the first one. Amar Ami bar Abba, hefshet v'nituach ba'olah. He says, we know that there's a law regarding korban olah, that you can't just do shechita and take the whole animal and put it on the mizbeach. We don't do that. Torah says first you have to skin it, then you have to butcher it into pieces, and then you take the pieces and you put those on the mizbeach. That's the right way to make an olah, for a number of good reasons. Number one, you don't want to put the skin on the fire because the skin smells very badly when it's burnt. And it's also respectful to the animal. I mean, to the extent that you could talk about treating an animal respectfully that you're killing and butchering and burning, yes, but there is a respectful way to do it that shouldn't be like gluttonous. So this is the way to do an olah, korban olah, even though it gets all burnt. And here's, everybody agrees with, but Rami bar Abba says, and so too butchers, even when you're eating meat at home and the butcher is making it for home use, you should follow the same procedure. In other words, don't do shechita and then just go grab a leg or grab a piece of meat from it. No, do it a proper way. First, you do shechita, then you skin the animal, and then you butcher it into pieces, and only then you should eat it. Okay. And so from here, we learn from the Torah the proper respectful behavior, because if you're going to go and just grab a piece of meat right after you do shechita, that is a gluttonous, not a nice way to act, not proper etiquette. Okay, good. So that's Rami's law. Now we ask, my kamash malan, what exactly is he teaching us? What halacha is he teaching us? Or is this just like nice advice, like how to act politely, finishing school, or is this an actual halachic application? So we want to try to see if there's a legal application to what he said. So we say, maybe he's telling us that he disagrees with Rav Huna. What did Rav Huna say? So אמר רב הונא, בהמה בחייה בחזקת איסור עומדת עד שיוודע לך במה נשחטה. נשחטה בחזקת היתר עומדת עד שיוודע לך במה נטרפה. Rav Huna said that if an animal's alive, then you have to assume it's prohibited, because a live animal is prohibited. You can't take off a piece of a limb from the animal and eat it. You have to assume it's prohibited until you know for sure how it died and it got proper shechita. You have to verify it, right? Just because you see it dead on the floor doesn't mean that that had proper shechita. So you have to verify that, and any doubt about that, you have to assume it's no good. However, once you did verify that it got proper shechita, then you assume chazakah that it's permitted, and until you have a good reason exactly to know why it would be a terefa. Terefa is an animal that had some kind of internal defect, a hole in its lungs or something, and it wouldn't live 12 months. So if you're looking into the animal and you see, oh, look, there's a defect here, a hole here. I don't know, did it come from that when it was alive? Or maybe it got punctured afterwards while we were cutting it and you're not sure. So he says you can be lenient afterwards. So how is this relevant? So according to Rav Huna, you don't have to check very much. All right, and according to him, you do shechita, and basically you don't have to go and check every little thing. You can just go ahead and eat it. So he does not require doing a lot of processing before eating it. Whereas Rami Bar Abba does require a lot of processing. According to him, you got to take off the whole thing, you got to remove all the parts, you have to do all the butchering, and only then you can eat it. So maybe his point is, check every part of the animal very carefully to see if it's a terefa. And he's saying this to say, I disagree with Rav Huna, who says you don't have to check very carefully because you have a presumption of kashrut. So maybe that's what he's saying. Well, that can't be, because we have our Mishnah follows Rav Huna. Where do we see that? Rabbi Akiva said, if you have just 5 minutes before Yom Tov and you see this animal and you say it doesn't look right, I'm afraid it's going to die, I want to do shechita right now, so you do shechita, and then you have 3 minutes left, that's okay, you just go and take a little piece of meat from the neck area, swallow it whole, and that's enough. So you see, according to Rabbi Akiva, you don't have to go ahead and check the lungs and check the intestines and check everything to see. You can assume that it's permitted, that there's no terefa. So since we follow, this backs up Rav Huna, so we must follow Rav Huna. So it can't be that Rami was going against it, right? And so doesn't this mean, wasn't Rabbi Akiva speaking literally, that you actually just take a piece of meat from the neck? No, we're going to save Rami and say, no, maybe Rabbi Akiva didn't mean literally a piece of its neck. And it meant makom, from a place where the animal slaughters, meaning processes its food. And where is that? In the animal's intestines. That's what you can take a piece from. Well, that's all the way at the, that's all the way inside. That means you are going to have to skin it and chop it up and do everything. So maybe Rabbi Akiva is not, in fact, a proof for Rav Huna. Well, Bichia said, no, he meant it literally. Just take a piece of the right there from the neck, which means that you don't have to do any of the butchering. So therefore, Rav Huna seems to be correct. So what about Rami Bar Abba? Rami Bar Abba orachara kamashmalan. In the end, you know what? We're going to go back to the other thing. He's teaching us proper etiquette. There's really no legal application regarding this, because technically, if you just do shechita and just take one piece right there, that's permitted, according to the Rabbi Akiva and Rav Huna. However, the Rami Bar Chama is saying that it's not proper behavior. I mean, maybe if you're in a pinch because you're in this Yom Tov situation, you can do it, but otherwise, you should act like a gentleman and do the skinning and the butchering first, and only then go ahead and eat it. All right, so that's all one law. And since we learned one law about the proper etiquette of eating, so that someone should not look like they're so gluttonous, we're going to learn another law, and this one applies to vegetables. Kedatanya. Lo yochal adam shum ubasal merosho ela me'alav. A person should not eat garlic or onions from the head. In other words, you pull it out of the ground and just eat the bulb directly while it's still attached to the leaves. And if you do that, it looks like you're a gluttonous person. Rather, you should take the leaves off, and then you make it nice, and then you eat it, right? So this looks like you're so hungry, like a caveman. You just rip it out and eat it, and you should prepare it first, make it look nice. Even though we don't care about the feelings of the onion or the garlic, right? But more about the proper behavior of the person. Also, don't drink your whole cup in one shot. They drank wine mixed with water. Generally, they wouldn't drink water by itself because it has a lot of germs in it, but they would put a little wine. The alcohol will kill the water. So they're drinking whatever, they're drinking wine or whatever. Don't drink the whole thing in one shot. That's not the proper way. It looks like you're a drinker. Rather, drink it slowly. How slowly? If you drink your whole cup at once, then you're a greedy drinker. 2 sips, that's proper, right? A whole cup, you drink a half of it, then drink the other half, that's okay. If it's 3 or more, you're taking little sips. This is like a very, very fine, fancy person. That looks like you're haughty, like you're who do you think you are? You're such a fine person. So therefore 2 is the proper amount. I'm assuming they had standard size cups, like a kiddush cup. Maybe it's a revi'it, about 3 ounces or so. So then, 1.5 ounces each swallow. That's about a cheekful. So that's proper, right in the middle. Good. Always take the middle path. This is some interesting agada. It says this plant, the sea squill. Here's a picture of it. Sea squill. This is known to have very long roots. The roots go all the way down. And even if you pull up the plant, the roots remain and they grow again. So this was often used in many places to be a boundary marker. So I would plant some sea squills at the edge of my field, and that way, if my neighbor came and tried to move it over and he pulled out the sea squills, well, he wouldn't go all the way down to the roots because they're very far, and it would grow again. And then if he started putting his fence into my land, I would see the sea squills growing on his side. You see, those are wrong. You see, you're wrong, and you stole from my property. So Rami Bar Abba, the same rabbi we saw before, he's teaching good proper etiquette, and now he's teaching that the sea squill will cut the feet of the wicked. In other words, they will testify against, there will be a proof of how wicked people are. Anyone who tries to steal land from their neighbor, the sea squill will come and say, you are a thief. And similarly, and young trees, a tree, you have the law of orla. For the first 3 years after you plant the tree, you're not allowed to take it at all. For the 4th year, you have to take it to Jerusalem. And so you see that planting a tree requires a lot of patience, so that in order to eat it. So, but the tree and the laws of the tree will undermine, right? Cut off the legs, will undermine any claims of butchers, because butchers, they tend to be, have no patience, and they just want to go and do it quickly and take the meat right away. And so, no, they should learn from the tree. That takes 4 years till you can take it. So you can take an extra few minutes, butcher, and chop it up properly, which is what Rabbi taught above. And also, bo'alei nidot, people who don't have any patience and they have relations with their wives while they are nida. So they also should learn the lesson from the trees that you take 4 years. So, you can wait another few days to be with your wife, and that would be proper. And so these will undermine the arguments and the impatience of the butchers and the impatient husbands. Good. Now, yet another lesson we can learn. Look, we can learn a lot of lessons from vegetables. Lupins, lupin, this is a picture of them. They grow like this, and they have seeds inside. Here's another version that's yellow. The seeds inside are very bitter. However, if you cook them a lot, soak them and cook them, then they become sweet, and they're even eaten as desserts. So lupins will undermine the enemies of Israel. We say enemies of Israel, it's a euphemism for the Jewish people themselves. How so? Shene'emar, ויוסיפו בני ישראל לעשות הרע בעיני אדוני ויעבדו את הבעלים. So this is a pasuk from Shoftim. Bnei Israel did evil in God's eyes, and they worshipped. Let's see how many foreign gods they worship. Baalim, Bet Ashtarot, Bet Elohe Aram, Bet Elohe Sidon, Bet Elohe Moab, Bet Elohe Ammon, Bet Elohe Pelishtim. 7 different sets of gods that Bnei Israel found to worship. Vayazbu et Adonai velo abaduhu, and they forsook God and did not serve Him, which is, really adding insult to injury. It's not bad enough that Bnei Israel went and worshipped Avodah Zarah, other idols, but they forsook Hashem. Like, at least if you're going to worship everyone, so worship Hashem also. So they're so bad that they did that. Okay, that's the pasuk. Now we learn a derasha about this. It already says this is redundant. It already says they left God, so that means they didn't serve Him. Don't I know if they left God that they didn't serve Him? אמר רבי אלעזר, אמר הקדוש ברוך הוא, אפילו כתורמוס הזה, ששולקין אותו 7 פעמים ואוכלין אותו בקינוח סעודה, לא עשאוני בניי. So here's where we compare Bnei Israel to a lupin, that they are worse than the lupins. A lupin, at least if you it's bitter, but at least when you cook it 7 times, then it becomes sweet and you can eat it. But my nation, they're so rebellious, even though they worship 7 different people, and I punish them each time. The punishing is similar to the roasting, cooking, and soaking the lupins. So, right, I roasted them and I punished them, and nevertheless, they didn't learn any lesson. And that usually, unlike lupins, okay, after that, it's a difficult process, but then they become sweet in the end. But Bnei Israel, even after the whole process, and I taught them lesson after lesson, even after that, they did not worship me. They never became sweet. So they're even worse than lupins. So therefore, the lupins will undermine the claims of Bnei Israel. All right. And now a little bit of praise of Bnei Israel too, although it's a kind of a backhanded praise. Tana mishemed Rabbi Meir, mipnei ma nitena Torah liYisrael, mipnei shehen azin. Why was the Torah given to Bnei Israel? Because they are, and here it says impudent, or maybe persistent. And so because they're so persistent and they're very strong-minded, strong-willed, they need Torah to control them. So it's kind of, they need it the most. Okay, how do we learn this? Tana deber Rabbi Ishmael, mimino eshtat lamo. Pasuk from Ezot HaBeracha, right? We're going to read this in just a few days. So from Hashem's right hand, He gave a law that's a fiery law to them. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Re'uyin halalu shenitin lahem dat esh. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu looked at all the nations of the world, and they have their good parts and bad parts, but this nation, Bnei Israel, they are so strong-minded, impudent, that they need the Torah the most to calm them down. They need to be, they need a fiery law to bring their nature back in the middle. Okay, so this is a little different than the popular midrash that says Hashem offered the Torah to everyone, but nobody wanted it except Bnei Israel. They're the only ones that took it. According to this, Hashem said, Bnei Israel, you need it the most. It's like a medication. Most people don't need medication, but they had a problem and they needed this. So in this, it's a little bit negative, but then they get this positive thing. Or another way to read the pasuk is that the esh is referring to Bnei Israel, not the Torah. These people, their way, their like religion, their way of being is fiery. And if not that the Torah was given to them to calm them down, then no nation would be able to withstand them. They're so outspoken and strong-willed that they would just gotta take over. So the Torah is necessary to calm them down. Okay. It's kind of like, Shimshon. It's too powerful. He needs something to calm him down. He needs to be a nazir so that he can control his strength. Otherwise, it will be too much. And this is what Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says. Shelosha azin hen. And Resh Lakish said there are three things that are very persistent. I would say is a better translation. Yisrael ba'umot, kele b'chayot, tanegol ba'ofot. So the other two, a dog and a rooster, they're known to be very persistent with their partners in terms of mating. And so similarly, not in terms of mating, but Yisrael is very persistent in that they survive among the nations, even as the nations say, try to kick them out of their lands and not inviting. Nevertheless, Israel is very persistent. And you see this in the next analogy too. Hamad Daka, also a goat among small cattle is very persistent, and a caper bush among trees. So this is probably the most relevant one. A caper bush it can be observed to grow anywhere, even if there's big trees that usually take up all the water, or between rocks, even unhospitable areas. The caper bush, it always finds a way to grow. And so too, Bnei Israel. So you see that their persistent, impudent nature is also a positive. It's what makes them able to survive in difficult circumstances and also able to accomplish and bring a lot of good things to the world. But it also needs to be controlled. And so therefore, they need the Torah to be able to bring that persistent and strong-willed nature in line and make it productive. Okay, so I think it's really a fascinating commentary on the Jewish people, and also I think we see that there's a lot of truth to this as well. Okay, and then now last section. Shechata basadeh loi be'ena bamot. Okay, the Mishnah, the last part of the Mishnah mentioned that if you do shechita of an animal out in the field, then you have to butcher it up out in the field and bring it in piece by piece and not bring it on a pole, because that doesn't look proper. That's like mass production and not good for Yom Tov. Tanura banan ena soma yoseh b'maklo. And so other poles that people cannot carry as a blind person may not go out with a pole, maybe like a walking stick on Yom Tov. Again, it looks like a weekday activity walking around with this walking stick. And also, a shepherd cannot go out with his satchel. That's like, going out with your pocketbook. So that's not proper. And this thing with the cane. See, if someone has a limp and difficult to walk without a cane, then they're permitted because they need it to walk. It's like a leg. But a blind person, it doesn't need it. He can walk fine. He just can't see where he's going. So, I mean, as long as someone is showing him where to go, so he won't, then he'll be okay. So therefore, it's different. The halacha is more lenient for someone who limps and needs a cane to walk than for a blind person who needs a cane just to not bump into things, but can technically walk. Okay, so that's an interesting halacha. And also, you're not allowed to go out on a chair or a litter, whether a man or a woman. We're talking about a chair that would be like this, a litter that would be carried by 4 people, and you have some important person that sits there in the middle. Also, that is not allowed because it's considered a weekday activity. You're carrying this burden, so it's not allowed. Now we have a challenge to this. Ini v'ashalach Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi zaken echad היה בשכונתנו, ויוצא בגלוד כי שלו. Says, so we have a challenge to this because we have testimony that there was an elder in the neighborhood of Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, and he would go out in a litter, right? He was an important person, and people would carry him around like that. They asked about this, and Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, the great sage, says it's permitted if the masses need him. In other words, he was a sage, he was a speaker, and he was lecturing on Torah, and he needed to get there, and he needs to go in a maybe it was hard for him to walk, or he has to go in a respectful way. It's like pulling up in a limousine with one of these. And so if it's for the purpose, if it's for the need of the many, then it's permitted to do so. So there you go. So that is an exception to the rule. And the rabbis relied on the statement of the Amar Ana of the Rabbi Achi Shakaya. He said, Ana apikted Ravuna mehini deshile mishile lehini. He said, I was one of those bearers, and I used to go and take Ravuna on the holiday from this town to that town. So we could give a lecture in this town and then give a class in the other town, and he would go out on a litter like this. So that supports. V'amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Ana pikte lemor Shemuel mishimsha letula metula l'shimsha. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak also, he would carry more Shemuel from the shade to the sun and sun to the shade. So you see that all these things are permitted for these great people. Hatam kelamad tama im hayu rabim selichim lo mutar. And so all these things are permitted because the people needed them. And even more Shemuel, he was teaching, maybe he was teaching in the shade, and he was teaching in the sun. He got to what? He went to the shade. And so all these things would be permitted. And almost done here. Amar Rav Nachman l'Chama bar Ada sheliach Sion. So Rav Nachman, he wanted to know more about this law. So he told Hama, the son of Ada, who was an emissary to Eretz Yisrael. He lived in Bavel, and he would go to Eretz Yisrael often. So he says, listen, I have a mission for you. Kisal kat lehatam, akef v'zil asulama desor, v'zil legabe de Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, ube'emine kiseh ma'atun be. Says, next time you go to Eretz Yisrael, go the long route. In other words, they're coming from here from Bavel. So this the short route would be you go down here through Damascus, and then you go right to Tiberias. That's where the rabbis were. He says, no, don't go that way. Go to the coast and then come down what's called the ladder of Tyre, because it was all big mountains here that you have to go up and down, and go to this city of Sor, because that's where Rabbi Yaakov lives. And I want you to ask him this question: are you allowed to carry a person on a chair, on poles, on Yom Tov? Okay, so he says, yeah, I'll go. He didn't go right away. By the time he went there on the next trip, by the time he got there, Rabbi Yaakov died. So, and the message didn't get to Bavel. However, when he went to Israel, he did find another sage, Rabbi Zerika. So he asked him, can you carry someone on a chair? Says, yes, as long as it's not on your shoulders. So you can carry them on another way. You can carry the poles maybe in your hand, lower down, or you can carry the person on your arms. Maybe like you put your arms out, other person put their arms out on each other's, locked together, and then the person can sit on their arms. But you can't put the poles on your shoulder. That is a way of carrying things that are like mass production, the way things you carry big burdens during the week, and not appropriate for the festival. Okay, what does it mean exactly? But that you shouldn't put on your shoulders. It means on poles, but like maybe to carry the person on your shoulders or some other way, putting your hands on each other's shoulders, that would be okay. But poles on the shoulders is not allowed. Ini, last question about this. Rav Nachman permitted his wife Yalta. Yalta is a famous woman. She was very, very learned woman, right? One of the women that we read a lot, like Berudia, and he permitted her to go out on a chair, carried on Yom Tov. So why was that allowed? You just said it's not allowed. Shani Yalta de Be'ita. No, Yalta is different because she was afraid, and so then if she would be carried in an unusual way, just with the hands, and would be shakier, whereas on the shoulders, that's more steady, right? Because the shoulder's not going anywhere. Just with hands, a person might drop it. So she was afraid of falling. So that was a special permission that she got. they would be carried to the Bet Midrash on shoulders because on Shabbat, because of the festival. In other words, they would give a public lecture before the holiday, like on Shabbat HaGadol, so that because everyone would come in and there would be a big lecture that they would give, so they had to be carried on a chair. One of two reasons: either because they also were afraid of falling, so they didn't want to be carried just by hand, so it had to be on the shoulders, or because the pushing of the crowd. There was such a big crowd that would come, and they'll want to, kiss his hand and get a beracha, and so they were afraid of being crushed, so they had to carry them up high on the chair and to save them from all the people that were pushing. And I remember when we used to go hear the Saturday night lecture from Obadiah Yosef in Yazdin, and there was such a big crowd and everybody was pushing to kiss his hand and get a beracha. He had bodyguards to push everybody back, so that because it was really a big crush. So that this scene reminds me of that scene. And one last point about Yalta is that, well, because she was such a learned woman, who knows, maybe she was going, not only because she was afraid, but maybe also because the public needed her. Maybe she was teaching a class, who knows? But although it really doesn't say it, only says because she was afraid. But that's a fun theory. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, amen ve'amen.